So I want to talk to you about our first paper. So again, like we talked about, our course is a paper-to-paper, project-to-project thing. And the first thing that we're doing, which we're going to be working on in discussion boards and topic proposals and rough drafts and peer review, is paper number 1. So for every major paper we have, the first thing in the module should be the assignment sheet. And the assignment sheet, you should read it. The genre of an assignment sheet is to break down what is expected of you in the paper. So this assignment sheet, it's going to talk about a couple more things. Your requirements. So this is what I like to tell students. The first thing you want to do when reading through an assignment sheet is look at what the minimum thing is required of you for any course. Because if you're writing a 500-word essay and your instructor's requirements are 2,000 words, you've only done 1/4 of them. So think about the grade you could get, right? If your instructor is requiring a different citation style and you use the other one. So keep that in mind. So look at the requirements first. The requirements for this paper is that it is a narrative critically considering your relationship with language. Approximately 750 to 1,000 words. I stick with word count. So if you're 3 or 4 pages, but you're trying to use like 15-point font in 1.5-inch margins, that's no dice. So I look at word count. You need to hit 750 words at least, okay? If you're hitting 500, you're well below the word count, and think about the type of grade that I can only give. You haven't even met the requirements. So a baseline, like an okay paper, I would say turns out to be a C. If your okay paper is 500 words and hasn't met the requirements for the paper, then it's not a C. I'm looking at probably a D or an F just on the baseline without even reading the paper. I have to consider it that way because you're not meeting the requirements. So all of these things are required of you. So your job in this paper is to write a literacy narrative. From our chapter 5, it talks about what a literacy narrative is. It says a literacy narrative is a particular kind of autobiographical narrative that recounts a writer's personal experience with language, reading, writing, and thinking skills, or with education as a process in a social institution. And so that's not in chapter 5, but chapter 5 explains some more conventions and skills of a literacy narrative. So your autobiographical narrative should focus on some aspect or experience with your coming to reading, writing, listening, or learning. The main format of this paper is narrative. So you're being graded on things like telling a good story, telling a focused story. I tell students not to be concerned that this is a focused story, not a story of everything. So I'm not looking for your entire journey with writing, from starting out as a child to right now. Rather, if you can tell me a guided story through somewhat of a thesis where you explain, your thesis is, your relationship with writing, right? That's your guided central point, and you're going to talk about it through these 2 stories or this one story. And the other thing I'm really looking for are details and descriptions. So how many of you have ever heard an instructor say, show, don't tell? Okay. I can tell you that the car was hot, right? And say this car was really hot. Or I could say, when I touched the car, my hand felt on fire, right? So I'm telling you that the car was hot through the feeling it had in my hand. So that's showing you. So that's also the kind of stuff is I don't want you to this isn't like first I started learning this, second I started learning this, third I started learning this. If you had a really transitional period in writing in middle school, write that story for this paper, right? And talk about it and, make connections between that and here. So that's what I'm looking at, is I am looking for you to write a focused narrative where you pick a couple of stories, or maybe just one story, not every story. I would say limit it to 2 stories. And the stories have to be linked. So you couldn't tell a story about how, you were a magician, and then a story about how writing in 5th grade, how you really came into writing in 5th grade. Those stories, unless you're going to link them and you're going to talk about how they're related, they're not related. So the other thing that you have is most of the readings that are, storied like readings, not just the textbook ones, but the story readings in this unit for paper number 1 are all forms of literacy narratives. So we've got Mike Rose, we've got Bradley Wittenstein, we've got Malcolm X. They all tell literacy narratives. And so use those as examples, right? Decide how they're writing those. Look at how focused they are. Look at the way they tell these stories. Look at the narrative conventions they use, the plot, the devices, the characters, and use those as models and examples for yourself, okay? So that's the introduction to the literacy narrative I want to give. There's more information in the chapters, and then there's more information in the examples I provide. So I'm looking forward to watching you work on these on Canvas, and then I'm looking forward to finally getting to read these. So, all right, happy writing. Thanks.